Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a product from a company called Trifo. So this is a robot vacuum that they've actually sent out to me for review. So they did actually send this out completely free, but they've not asked me to make the review in any particular way, and they haven't told me what to say either. It was literally just a case of sending me the product and asking me to make a video on it with my thoughts. Now this is obviously my first robot vacuum. I've not actually had any previous ones from other companies, even though there's quite a few different ones that I have looked at in the past. And in terms of Trifo as a company, having looked on their website and had a quick look at the other products that they do, it seems like they've got a few tiers to the actual robot vacuums that they actually produce. So this one you could almost look as a entry-level one, but this particular one that they've sent me has a few additions. So this is the Emma Pet version. So this basically comes with the ability to use a pet hair brush, which actually comes included in the pack. I personally don't have a use for that, but it's obviously there for anybody that would require it. And this one also comes with a sort of wet cleaning as well, so it does have the option where you can actually use this for basically cleaning either a laminate floor, a wooden floor, or obviously tiles as well. Now that's a feature that I've not personally used, simply because of where I've actually got it located, and the fact that because I have rugs in that particular room, it wouldn't really be feasible for me to keep switching out when I'm using it for wet and when I'm using it for dry. So I've had this for roughly about a week now, and I wanted to give it a good chance to actually get set up and basically have a few days at least of continuous use from it before I made any video on it. I've come to a little bit of a conclusion. There are a few good points to it, and there are some bad points to it as well. So what I'll do is first I'll just quickly go over everything that's listed on in terms of the packaging and everything like that. So some of the claims that it makes is the fact that obviously it's a smart vacuum, a smart robot vacuum, so it does come with a app. Now the app is quite limited, but it does give you all the functionality that you would need from a very basic standpoint. It is connected to Amazon Alexa, however, despite that, I've never actually been able to get it to work. Not that I personally use Alexa that much nowadays anyway, so that's not really that big of an issue for me. A couple of the other sort of claims it makes on the packaging is the fact that the suction power is 4000 PA. I'm not sure what the PA actually stands for, but having had a quick search around, 4000 does seem quite a good number for a suction sort of metric, if you like. However, what you'll probably find is, if anybody's out there looking at anything like this, is the actual brush mechanisms are probably more important or as important as the actual suction itself, because as most people find, even with handheld vacuums, it isn't necessarily the power of the vacuum, but more so how effective the actual brush head or mechanism is in terms of actually flicking the dirt into the place or the sort of channel that it needs in order to pick up all the dirt. And one of the other claims is obviously with regards to the runtime, so 110 minutes from a single charge. Now that obviously depends entirely on how you've got it running, whether you've got it on max power or whether you've got it turned down. Originally out of the box, it does actually come set up with the power almost, I'd say about a quarter. So it's set to about a quarter of its maximum power. And on that setting, obviously it is very quiet. That's obviously a positive thing on it, and it will do a reasonable job with any light dirt, but at that setting it probably won't be picking up and dusting too well. If you do max it out, which is what I tend to leave it on, then it'll perform a lot better, but obviously it will have an impact on the battery life itself. So in this part of the video, what I'm going to do is just do a screen recording on my phone so you guys can see the difference in terms of what the various volume levels are for the vacuum, because by default it will actually come with it switched quite low, the actual suction of the vacuum, and obviously the quoted sort of runtime will always be based upon a very low suction level, so basically where it's not using that much of the battery power. Essentially all you do is you just click on whichever vacuum you've got loaded, and then if you come down into the bottom right, you've got suction setting. Once you click on that, as you can see at the moment I've got it maxed out. Now if I was to bring this all the way down, I believe it starts around about there, so that's roughly the sort of setting that it actually comes on. So if I just hit clean to actually switch it on, As you can see, it's still relatively quiet and you can still actually hear me. And what I'm going to do is just pause it there and move it back to where it was. Okay, now what I'm going to do is turn that all the way to the max, and I'll basically just do the same thing again. And instantly you should be able to tell it's quite a bit louder. Okay, so now whether or not you need to do that, whether you need to max it out, obviously that's dependent on your situation, what type of surface you're using it on, how often you want it to run, how long you need it to run before recharging. The initial charge did actually take quite a long time, so the first time I put it on charge, it actually took pretty much the whole night. Since then, what I've found is whenever it needs to just top itself up, it does seem to charge a little bit faster. However, if you've got a very open plan house or setting wherever you want to actually set this up, then you probably want it to get everything done as best as possible in one hit rather than having to do half, recharge and then go again, because essentially all it's doing is it creates a map as it goes along. So it's not got a memory of where it is. It literally just goes from the home point, wherever the charging point is, and it will just go out into the world and sort of scan the room as it's vacuuming, and then it doesn't retain anything in its memory. So essentially every single time you're turning it on, it's rescanning the room as it's going along. So when I show some of the close-ups of the actual vacuum, you'll probably see residue of like paint and stuff that it's been bumped into surfaces, and it's taken a little bit of the sort of paint or whatever it's bumped into, has taken some of the residue off, and it's basically stuck onto the front of it. Certain heights as well, so certain heights of objects do trip it up as well, because it does have a rubber bumper along the front of the vacuum. However, what happens is if the surface, such as a table, the bottom level of a table for example, if that is above ground level, then that can actually bump straight into where the IR sensors are, as opposed to going into right where the bumper is. So flat surfaces, yeah, it will just bump into it, figure out that there's something there and then try and work its way around it. But for anything that's complex, sometimes it can struggle a little with that. The other thing I found that it really struggles with as well is the fact that the actual brush on the side, the small 3-point brush, the sort of job of that is to brush dirt into its path, and then it kind of comes back and it vacuums up what it's missed. However, what I've found is there isn't really an overlap. So cutting the lawn, for example, I'll always overlap by 50%. And that's one thing that this vacuum doesn't seem to do. It wants to basically vacuum down a straight line, and then rather than overlapping and redoing 50% of that, it wants to just loop back on itself and vacuum up the next section after it. And the little spinning brush essentially is supposed to just flick any dirt it missed back into its path. It does also overlap in the pattern that it does as well, and each time I've run the vacuum, it seems to do a different path every single time. So there's no real structure to how it's going about cleaning the room. The main sort of issue with it at the moment is the fact that it does tend to miss the little bits and bobs here and there that I would have thought would be a very simple fix by simply overlapping each pass by 50%. So maybe that's something that they can actually work on in a future firmware update. But generally speaking, it does pick up quite a bit. I've run it both on the low setting as well as the high setting as well. And as I say, it's all dependent on how you want to use it, how much battery life you want to get out of it. I have found that the battery life does tend to be fine if you're just doing it in one room this sort of size. So I've just left it maxed out in terms of the actual suction setting, because I know that it will definitely vacuum that whole room and return back to home before it will actually run out of battery. So plus obviously if you have got this running in a particular room, a heavy traffic room that you use quite often and it's going to get dirty quite often, if you're running it daily or even twice daily, then it's not going to have as much dirt to pick up anyway. So gradually it's going to get to the point where, yeah, even though the suction might not be great, it doesn't actually need to pick up that much because it's doing it maybe twice a day, 3 times a day, however much you want to actually schedule that in. Okay, so coming to my thoughts on the actual vacuum itself, I'd say it gives you enough functionality from the app to where you can get done what you need to do. But I think one of the sort of weak points for me personally, that I found was, so as part of the sort of claims that it makes is the efficiency by which it actually vacuums. So from wherever it starts off, it will come out and then it will basically do a sort of parallel pattern around the room until it hits a obstruction. So for example, even if it's coming out and the room is open but there's something in the way, then all of a sudden it will change its pattern and it will just randomly go around the room. Now, one of the weak points that I found was the fact that once it's actually done the center of the room, it doesn't overlap that center part of the room. It will spend far longer going around and doing all of the edges of the room in comparison to how long it actually spends in the middle of the room. And for most people, they're probably going to find that if you're running this regularly, because obviously if you've got it, you're going to put it on a schedule, you're going to have it running regularly each day, then what you'll probably find is that you'd much rather it concentrate longer in the center of the room. It's a lot more useful to have it concentrate more in the center of the room in comparison to where it spends its time going around all the edges, which is good. Don't get me wrong, I do like that it does actually try its best to get every single nook and cranny, but the amount of time that it actually spends in the middle of the room can sometimes be a negative. The other thing that I mentioned a little earlier on was the fact that whenever it hits an obstruction, so for example, if you've got shoes, if you've got, I don't know, a table, a coffee table, something laid out in the middle of the room, even if it can go underneath it or go around it, it upsets its pattern. So rather than being parallel lines and then overlapping lines back, all of a sudden what it'll do is it'll just randomly start going at weird angles in order to figure out where it can get to. Because the one thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't keep a memory of the rooms. So when it's actually out vacuuming, essentially it resets every time, and all it's doing is it's using the sensors that are built into the unit in order to figure out how far it can go. So as it's vacuuming, it is creating a picture in its mind or in the app of what it's vacuumed. That's how it knows not to go back over the same spot, and effectively that's where the efficiency comes into it. But that's also a downside, because as soon as that straight path gets upset, all of a sudden it doesn't really react in the same way. So I've done tests where I've dropped an object in the center of the room, and every single time I've run the vacuum in that scenario, it takes a different path every single time. Now what that means is a lot of times in the app it will show you the spots that it's missed. It will show up as a little sort of area within the room that it's creating, and within that, those random spots where it's missing will change. So that means that every time you run it, essentially it's going to give you different results. Now, ideal scenario, if you've got an open plan setting and everything's on the same level, then it will do a really good job in terms of just getting any loose dirt. It's not going to go in and vacuum all the dust and dirt out of deep pile carpets, and it's not going to pick up anything that's really dug into fibers, fabric on fabric. So for example, threads that have fallen down onto a rug, it struggles to pick that up. But having said that, so do most handheld vacuums. So until you're getting into really powerful handheld vacuums that generally only have a battery life of maybe 10 minutes on their turbo mode, it does a good enough job because you know you're going to be running it every single day. It's not designed in order to keep your whole house clean as the only vacuum. The purpose of this product is to actually keep most of the dirt picked up and collected, so then if there are any minor spots, then you can obviously go around and do those manually or just run it again. Because even with the rooms that I've tested it in, when I've run it several times, the lowest the batteries ever got to is maybe about 53%. So in theory I could probably do the whole ground floor of my house if it was all one level without it actually running out of battery. So that's actually a really good thing, even on max power. The problem with that is that because it doesn't really create a picture, wherever you pick it up and start the vacuum, that is where essentially it thinks the home base is. So when the battery runs out, it doesn't return to the home base, it just returns to where it started, and it basically gets confused. The other thing that I have found is that whenever you're actually running the vacuum, and if there's something in the way, then it will bump into objects quite often. And what I've actually found is, in any of the rooms where I've got anything down low that is black, so for example my sofas have black coverings on them, and wherever it's black, it actually physically bumps into those objects. Now, what I have noticed is whenever it comes up to any of my walls or the skirting boards, which are white, it will actually stop just before it bumps into them. So something within the sensors of the vacuum are clearly picking up on the fact that the black doesn't reflect back as well. So it's not actually stopping in time. It's not a massive issue apart from the fact that I wouldn't want to run it in this room because the media console behind me has a glossy black finish. And the very first time I ran it in this room, it actually left rubber marks along the whole length of the media cabinet behind me, where it was basically bumping into the whole length of that cabinet. The other thing is it doesn't really work very well with trailing cables, and in this room in particular, I tend to have, because of my whole YouTube stuff, I tend to have a lot of cables just tucked about whilst I'm not using them, which isn't ideal because it will try and get into every nook and cranny, and it will probably end up eating the cables. So in terms of figuring out where you can run this, it has to be on one open floor pan. It can get over rugs, it can get over small objects, but it can't necessarily do it every single time. So it will occasionally manage to ride up onto a skirting board or something, and because the wheels aren't spinning, it will then send a message to your phone or your watch telling you to basically go and pick it up and move it again. So not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but also a very, very good product in terms of doing exactly what it's designed to do, giving you enough control through the app. Now, talking about the app, there is one part of the app that I really dislike, and I wish that Trifo will actually do something about it, and that is the manual control within the app. So you can actually control this vacuum completely manually. So you can actually put it into manual mode and then you control where it goes. However, the problem with that side of the app is what I would like to see is if it creates a picture of the room, I would like to just highlight, say, the center section of the room wherever there's a spill, and the vacuum just goes, vacuums that up and goes back to the home base. However, what you have to do is manually take it to wherever the spill is and obviously have the vacuum running. Now, the problem with that is the controls are very laggy. So from the point when you actually hit left and it rotate it, it will maybe take a second or two. So it's not very intuitive in terms of controlling the vacuum in that way, because you will just constantly be bumping into stuff. Whereas what I found is if you just leave it on auto, even if there's only a small section of the room that you want to actually vacuum, just put it on auto, hit clean, and just leave it to it. So yeah, the manual control side of things with the vacuum, I wish they would improve that and make that slightly better. Simple solution would be just highlight boxes. So you highlight where you want the vacuum to go, it goes, it vacuums that area, and then it returns back to the home base. I think that would be a much better way of actually doing the manual control as opposed to what it does right now, where it's essentially just giving you a joystick, and each time you basically want it to do something, you have to hit the toggle yourself, and it's just a very convoluted way of doing things, and it just doesn't seem to work very well. Final thing to mention on the app was I actually had a lot of difficulty in actually getting this to connect to the app in the first place. Some of that could be down to my network. So I have both a 2.4 as well as a 5 gigahertz combined network, and essentially what the device is meant to do and the router between them, it's meant to automatically figure out which is the best or the only sort of signal it can connect to. Now, I actually tested this on my iPhone 13 Pro Max. I tested this on an iPad. I tested it on several different devices. The iPad Air was an original one, which I believe is only limited to 2.4 gigahertz anyway, and it just would not connect properly. And I'm not sure how I actually got it connected in the end, because even when it did connect, the process and the actual app still said to me that the process had failed. The only difference being that the light on the actual vacuum had changed, so that acknowledges the fact that it's finally connected to your network. What I did find was entering it manually, so entering both the SSID, your Wi-Fi ID, as well as the password manually, may have made a difference, but realistically speaking, it was just pot luck. So that's something that they could possibly also take a look at. I don't know whether that was on my end or on the side of the app, but adding it to the app was an absolute nightmare. So that's something that hopefully they can get sorted out or just make more streamlined in the future. So that's my thoughts on the vacuum itself. For anybody out there that's possibly looking at a entry-level vacuum, a robot vacuum that they just want to pick up light dirt and debris, this is something that I would probably highly recommend for them. Trifo themselves actually have various levels of robot vacuums as well. So somewhere down the line, maybe I might actually get some of their other products and actually review those for you as well. But for now, this is my thoughts on this particular model. It does a really good job in terms of light, dirt and debris. Don't expect it to do a deep cleaning of your whole house, but it will, if you set it up on a schedule, keep it relatively clean, keep it dusted. On your laminate flooring, it does a very good job. I was actually very impressed by how well it actually dusted and cleaned on the laminate side of things, because it's very difficult to actually pick up dirt without a roller, a sort of foam roller on laminate flooring normally. So yeah, it's done a very good job, and I would recommend it to anybody out there that's looking for an entry-level robot vacuum. I will also have a few follow-ups coming on this product. If you are interested in the wet dry side of things, just drop me a comment in the comment section below and I'll get a video made on that. Anyway, that's it for this particular video. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and also hit the notification bell, and I'd really appreciate if you also give this video a thumbs up. And other than that, thanks very much for watching.